Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dr. Medic channel. My name is Justin and I've got some good news for you and I've got some bad news for you. The bad news is that we had another air medical helicopter crash last night, but the good news is not only did all three of them survive, it sounds like all three of them were not even injured. Stick around and we'll see what we know so far about this PennSTAR helicopter crash coming up. So this crash is going to be in a 1997 BK-117C1 model with tail number 117 November Charlie. I believe this model has the Turbomeca aerial engines making about 650 to 700 horsepower each. Now don't let the age of this aircraft fool you, as the BK-117 is a perfectly capable aircraft, and I'm sure that this was maintained to the highest standards, as this aircraft was operated by Metro Aviation, which is a wonderful operator. They obviously don't make these BK-117s anymore because it's been replaced with the EC-145, but the BK-117 is an absolute workhorse. It's a twin-engine aircraft with rear-loading doors to load a full-size stretcher. It's powerful, it's fast. Yes, it's very, very bumpy, but it's an absolute great aircraft for air medical operations. So let's take a look at what happened here with this news report, because part of this was actually caught on video. So let's take a look here.
Breaking news in Montgomery County, a Mayday call followed by an emergency landing with a medical helicopter ending up on a front lawn in a White Marsh Township neighborhood.
So let's jump ahead to the actual video of the helicopter here.
New video sent to us from a viewer shows the final seconds before landing with the helicopter hurtling toward the ground. The chopper, a PennSTAR 1 from UPenn, was headed to Wings Field in Bluebell when the pilot called Mayday.
Now it's hard to see much there, but we can see the helicopter is descending quickly. It's not spinning and still has quite a bit of forward momentum. Now the audio of the Mayday call is also available, so let's take a listen to that real quick. And then you can see he managed to put it on the ground right here in front of this guy's house on this beautiful fescue or ryegrass lawn here. I mean, it doesn't even look like he damaged the dude's grass. Nice striping by the landscaper, by the way. And then we can hear the pilot again say this.
6007 Musket Road, wherever that works out. We're on the ground, all three crew members still alive.
Good work. Good to hear. And you know, just a strange thing about this landing zone, if you come over here to the maps and you look at what this neighborhood looked like just a few years ago, it's completely filled with all of these trees. And you can see even this particular house, that I think I have the right house here, had all of these giant trees in the front yard. And you can see that the Google Maps is updated as I kind of, scroll around here and kind of go up and down the street. And even up until recently, it appears to have this big tree in the yard, which, as you can obviously see in the news article, this tree is no longer there. Just this little tree over here that seems to have grown up a little bit. Anyway, I just thought that it was a bit nuts that the one big open space that they chose to land in just recently had a giant tree in the way. Anyway, this helicopter is a part of the PennSTAR hospital-based air medical program out of the University of Pennsylvania, or otherwise known as Penn Medicine, where the med crew are employees of the University of Pennsylvania and the pilot is an employee of the operator, which in this case is Metro Aviation. Okay, so let's take a look at the actual flight data. And if we jump over here to the ADS-B data for yesterday, remember that these times that you're seeing on here are all going to be in Zulu time, which I believe the local time there for Philadelphia should be 4 hours less than the Zulu times that you see on here. Anyway, we could just kind of jump back here a couple of legs for the day, and we can kind of go back onto, and you can see here that they took off from their base, which is located at Wings Field Airport, which is this small local airport here, at about 17:51 hours, and had what was most likely a beautiful and uneventful 18-minute flight up to the University Medical Center of Princeton Hospital, where, they presumably picked up some type of patient requiring critical care transport, which, overall takes them about 40 minutes to package up their patient, and then they turn around and head towards Philadelphia at 18:49 hours. So now after about another 18 minutes, they then land at Penn Presbyterian Medical Center, which is the big, huge hospital, level 1 trauma center located just to the west of downtown Philadelphia. Now, they're only on the ground there for about 27 minutes, which, that sounds like it's pretty quick, but it's perfectly doable, especially if your helicopter is left sitting up on the pad, when you have these big helipads, you don't want to be occupying that helipad if there's only room for one helicopter, so you're not blocking it in case some other helicopter comes in on a time-sensitive trauma flight or something like that. So it's pretty common to have pretty quick turnarounds on these types of helipads. Anyway, they take off on the accident leg at about 1935 hours local time and are headed back to their home base at Wings Field Airport. Now, if we turn on these data points here, we can kind of get a look at their altitude and speed, and it looks like they're flying, along at about 1,300 feet. Now, this area is generally, rises up a little bit from Philadelphia, but once you kind of get north of Philadelphia, it's, anywhere from 150 to about 300 feet in elevation. So they're probably flying at about 1,000 feet or 1,100 feet above the ground and seem to be cruising, maybe at an average of about 109 or 110 knots. Now, the BK-117 can cruise a little bit faster than this, but they're probably flying a bit slower than they normally would because you see last night they were flying a slightly northwesterly track and there were winds out of the northwest at the time of their accident at about 8 or 9 miles an hour, which in the end may have played a role in helping to get them safely on the ground. Anyway, so they're flying along, cruising just fine, and they're not too far from their actual home base airport when right here at about 2340 Zulu time or 1940 local time, you can see that their speed drastically reduces from 108 knots to 92 knots, and they start descending fast. Now, as soon as something starts going wrong, they have a very fast descent rate that looks like it's about 5,400 feet a minute, which is just a wicked fast descent rate. That's like just falling out of the sky almost. Like a normal landing approach would be around 200 or 300 feet per minute, for the most part. So, for like a moment here, they're falling out of the sky extremely fast. And at that point, but then they do start to slow down here to like 4,480 feet a minute. Then it kind of goes back up. Then it kind of goes back down to 3,900 and then down to 2,900. And so it is kind of reducing. And what that tells me is that this pilot is definitely controlling this descent now. And so he's probably entered an auto rotation just based on this ADS-B data. Now we get in a little bit closer. You can see that the helicopter, it doesn't really appear to be spinning around, and it is flying at about 60 knots, and it comes in and is most likely able to do a really nice auto rotation flare of some sort to land this helicopter safely in this guy's lawn. Okay, and now when we kind of import the same data into Google Maps here, it just gives you a little bit better visual of what we're looking at. And you can see here where they took off from this helipad. And again, you can see that they take off, they fly in this northwest direction, flying mostly over this park right here. Really no problems whatsoever. They get over this golf course, then they get over a second golf course, then they get over the third golf course. And it's right about in this area over this third golf course where they have some type of catastrophic failure. There's a little bit of zigzag and back and forth, a couple of up and downs, and he's probably trying to control his auto rotation. And then you can see that right about here, 6, 7, 8 houses away from where he landed the aircraft, he starts to kind of smooth it out. He ends up bringing it in nice and smooth. And this is probably where the video captures him that we saw earlier. And now that I kind of look at it on this picture, it looks like he must have spun the aircraft around at the very end as he was coming in here at a northwest direction, and the helicopter came to rest facing more of a southeast direction. So it must have spun around about 180 degrees at the very end. And I don't even see any damage to this guy's lawn. Like I said, look at the stripes of this lawn. It doesn't even appear that the helicopter slid very far before or after where the aircraft is. So, maybe they came right down here and then they spun around 180 degrees right at the end. But either way, they all walked away from it. Amazing landing. Kudos to the pilot for being able to make this work and for everybody here to be able to walk away safely. So what in the world brought this helicopter down? Well, the pictures are pretty obvious that it's missing one key component of the helicopter, and that is the entire tail rotor. It's not just damaged, but the entire tail rotor and the tail rotor gearbox is completely missing from the back of this aircraft. So what could cause this tail rotor gearbox to come off? Well, really, there's a million things that could have happened. There could have been a maintenance issue, or somebody forgot to tighten a bolt. Yes, I already mentioned that Metro has an amazing maintenance program, but anything is possible. You could have had a bird strike. There could have been some type of failure to a component with a drive shaft or a coupling, or one of the gears inside failed, that had nothing to do with maintenance whatsoever. Either way, that's not something that we can really figure out right now, but I would bet that that is something that the NTSB will probably discover pretty quickly during their investigation. Now, the tail rotor and gearbox actually were found just a few houses up the street, and it appears that, to me anyway, that both blades are still attached here to the gearbox, and the gearbox itself looks like it catastrophically separated somewhere right around where the upper tail rotor drive shaft enters into the tail rotor gearbox. Now, I'm sure that this gearbox will be a primary focus of this investigation. And so what happens when the entire tail rotor assembly comes flying off of a helicopter? Well, contrary to popular belief, a failure of the tail rotor or the loss of the tail rotor on a helicopter in forward flight, it can actually be manageable. Yeah, we've got to remember that the purpose of the tail rotor on a helicopter is to function as, an anti-torque device to counteract the torque of the main rotors, which in turn prevents the helicopter fuselage from spinning around in the opposite direction of the main rotor blades. Now, every helicopter is a little bit different, but in general, somewhere between 40, 50, 60 knots of forward flight. Again, it depends on the helicopter, but the tail rotor will then play less and less of an anti-torque role as the faster the helicopter goes, the more air is going through the vertical stabilizer. And in the case of the BK-117, well, technically there's 3 of them back there, which these vertical stabilizers create sort of a weather vaning effect, which keeps the helicopter straight. Now remember, this helicopter was probably going about 110 knots when the tail rotor flew off. And if you were going to lose a tail rotor, that's the speed that you want to lose it at, because you have the weather vaning effect of the forward speed keeping the helicopter pointed straight. Now, there actually are certain situations and there are certain helicopters that if the helicopter is flying fast enough and the tail rotor is lost, that the helicopter theoretically could continue in forward flight as long as is necessary for the pilot to plan for a landing in a safe spot. But like I said, all of that depends on the helicopter design and whether or not the helicopter is continuing to experience that weather vaning effect. In this case, the tail rotor didn't just fall off, it also ripped half of this center vertical stabilizer apart. And that could have made things even worse for this pilot, as he undoubtedly would have lost some of that weather vaning from losing half of this vertical fin. And so it is clear that once this tail rotor was lost, that the pilot then made the decision to immediately try to land the aircraft. Well, how do you land a helicopter when you don't have a tail rotor? Again, this is actually a survivable and a manageable emergency depending on the situation. And it is something that, is practiced during check rides with, simulated stuck pedals or a simulated loss of tail rotor or something like that. But in short, the pilot would basically have to land the aircraft by entering a normal auto rotation, which would include immediately lowering the collective and rolling off of the throttle. Now, why do they have to roll off the throttle? Well, the reason is because as the helicopter starts to slow down its forward speed, while the pilot is trying to land, the pilot will start to lose that weather vaning effect. And if there's power still being applied to the main rotors, the helicopter is going to start spinning without the anti-torque effect of the tail rotor. So the pilot not only has to reduce power by lowering the collective, but also has to roll off the throttle, which in this case on a BK-117, I believe the throttles are up top and they actually have to roll off the throttle by taking their hand off of the collective and pulling the throttle levers back. Just one more thing to add to the task overload for this situation, but they have to roll that throttle back to ensure that there is no power being applied to the main rotors. I mean, it's not going to be like a perfect landing or anything, as there still may end up being some yaw of the aircraft, but the pilot can compensate with some cyclic control here and there. But nonetheless, it's basically like an auto rotation, except they also have to turn the throttles down. And so, based on this video and based on the evidence of the tail rotor being ripped off, it seems that that is exactly what happened in this situation, that the pilot was flying along, had some sort of catastrophic loss of the tail rotor, which we don't know the cause of that. He then immediately recognized it, he lowered the collective, rolled the throttles back and entered a full auto rotation and was able to put this helicopter right smack in the middle of this guy's beautiful fescue lawn. And like I said earlier, the fact that he was doing this directly into a headwind probably also aided a little bit in his ability to slow down the aircraft and control it all the way to the ground. One way or another, there are going to be several things to learn from this accident. One, we certainly need to discover what it was that caused the rear tail rotor gearbox assembly to fail and come off of this aircraft. Hopefully the NTSB will do it, at least a Class 3 investigation and attempt to determine the root cause of that failure. Two, once we get a detailed account of what the pilot felt and experienced when the failure occurred and how the pilot responded, everybody will be able to use that as a perfect example of how to respond to a catastrophic loss of a tail rotor by entering the appropriate auto rotation with, all of the appropriate steps to take and everything. And three, we have two med crew in the back who were able to walk away, seemingly unscathed. Their experience is also important here, and I'm sure there are many out there that would be able to learn from their experience last night, and I hope we're able to hear from them someday and learn from what it was that they went through. Again, super happy, super stoked that everybody survived. Sounds like an amazing piece of work by the pilot with the landing. I look forward to seeing what the NTSB uncovers. Everybody fly safe, and I will see you guys on the next one.